Welcome back to my channel, guys. It is G here, and I have my special guest. This is my friend Erin. Um, we're gonna have so much to talk about. It's gonna be so exciting. But Erin and we met. We're actually both from Chicago. We met in Chicago because both our partners were French. Notice I said were. Um, and we're going to just have a little bit of a conversation about our relationships with our French people and kind of like the evolution from that period to where we are now. So, subscribe to my channel. I have all kinds of interesting conversations on this channel, y'all, so you don't want to miss them. Subscribe and let's get into this little conversation about our French past lovers and
French
where we are
connection.
now. Right, their French connection. You and I, we didn't really hang out in Chicago.
We met a
And
few times, but it
yeah,
was
we met
never
a
for
few
long
times.
periods or anything. Maybe it was,
Exactly.
I don't even know if it was two or three, but nice, but not that often.
Yeah, exactly. And so we really started connecting kind of after we were both in France and like when your relationship and my relationship kind of ended around the same time.
Yeah, right around the same time.
Yeah, and we were
We
in
both ended up
France.
in Paris.
I know, I know. And Paris, is like my great love. Like I love Paris. But I probably loved Paris more than I loved the relationship.
Anyways, I never thought of France as a place I would have chosen to end up. I always thought I was going to end up international, though. That was just kind
Mm,
of part of me. But then the relationship ended not long after we moved to France, and I was in grad school, and I was struggling with France a lot. But I actually had a good experience, even with there was a lot of shittiness of
mm.
being a foreigner in France. But there was a lot of, so Lyon, where I was first, was great, and then Paris, I was broke as hell, interviewing for
I
jobs and stuff, but I was still
remember.
living this like fucking romantic life in Paris. It was actually, and I'm not the Francophile guy. I'm not like I want to be Emily in Paris one day. I was like, France,
Yeah.
and I was like, this place it has something about it that was really good. And even in a tough time, it was a nice home. Wasn't there long, but we overlapped, so that was where we first had a conversation.
Really, yeah, that's
Uh,
really where we started to have like a chat. And it was kind of like after both our relationships had
hmm
ended. So I guess for me, and I'll start a little
Yeah,
bit.
yeah, please.
So for me, it was interesting because like this is one of those things about me. I never imagined myself married to anybody, right? And so when I met him, I'll leave his name out of it. It was more of a we were really into each other for a bit, and he like we already knew like if we were going to be together, one of us would have to move and we would likely have to get married. And so since I had more life established in Chicago, he moved to Chicago, we got married, and it was kind of like, well, let's see what happens. And I don't know. I mean, my current relationship is similar. We only knew each other a few days before I kind of jumped in, but now it's been 5 years. But it was really very quickly starting to turn proper shite. Um, we were like disconnected physically, we were like disconnected on a lot of different aspects. And one of his great reasons was because he was not getting on in Chicago. He wasn't feeling America. He wasn't feeling that. And so when things for me started to kind of change, my job changed, things with my son changed, all of these things like changed. He was just like, well, let's just go live in France. And it's easier to be poor in Paris than it is in the US, right? And so I was like, okay, I think I can live anywhere. And since he was having such a hard time, I was like, this makes sense. And so I think I had great expectations of him once we got there and, for him to really step up. But it really seemed like he expected for me to do a lot more than he would, like in his country. Like in my country, I was going to take the lead. I get it. I'm here, you came here for me, I'm going to take the lead. But now this is your country. You got to do the leading. And so he really wasn't doing that. And it was just turning into more and more drama, to say the least. Now, outside of him, I was having a great time. Like I had met French friends, like I was going out having like wine, I was getting wasted with the girls, like I was like just, that single, almost like single life, you know what I mean?
And you went directly, just one quick question. You went directly to Paris, or were you somewhere else? Were you in Brittany at all, or did you go straight
No,
to Paris?
we didn't go to Brittany because he had a flat in Paris. So that's why we went straight there. So originally, yeah, he's Breton. Some people probably don't know like the
Yeah.
geography
The
of France.
listeners
So
should know that's another
yeah,
one of our connections, is that
yeah,
both of our
they're
exes were
from
from a specific region of France.
exactly. They were
Yeah.
both Breton, and
Breton or Brittany for
yeah,
other
they're from
people. Yeah.
Brittany, Britannia in northern France, which is near Normandy. And so they were both from there, and it's a very beautiful place.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, and it was really interesting. And I think they actually are the reason we connected because he was constantly looking for French people to connect with. And so she was one of those people that he found in Chicago as connection. So that was kind of like the beginning and the how it kind of started to turn to something that was going to end um, for me. And so I mean, I don't know like if you relate to any of those kind of like changes when it comes to, I don't know, relationship with her. Yeah, go ahead.
As you were saying things, there were a couple points that I'll mention where our experiences departed a bit, but so much of my experience was identical. So
Mm,
I had previously been married once, but this is the big reveal. But it was dumb. I was in the military long ago, and I had one of these. It lasted like less than a year. One of these things where you meet a girl right off the base. She's trying to escape her like crappy little town, and you're the handsome sailor on the submarine. And it was like a whirlwind. First girlfriend I ever had, blah blah. But it was over before it started,
mm,
and we long ago lost touch with each other. Fast forward, then I have normal dating life and all that, and then fast forward to after I got out of the military, I went to DePaul University. That's how I ended up in Chicago using the GI Bill. Finished school,
because you're
and
originally from New York.
I'm originally from upstate New York, but I grew
Okay.
up half there and half in Michigan. We moved around a lot growing up, but I consider upstate New York kind of my home, kind of in the heart. I feel good there. I'm
Okay.
actually shopping for land there to build a little off-grid cabin. That's
Nice.
another
That's
episode.
another story.
But
Yeah.
yeah, but anyways, so I graduated school. I'm in Chicago, graduate from school, and I was interviewing for jobs, and that was going well, but it took some time. So I was doing like part-time work or whatever, and had a lot of time on my hands. And I had met my ex when she was traveling in Chicago. So she was an architect, had finished school, but had to do an independent project, and she was doing it on architecture in Chicago. And so she was around for a few months, and we had this whirlwind meeting connection, great intense experience, but then there was always this back and forth as far as the thing with the borders and France, the US, and we ended up getting married for basically the same reasons. For me, I had it before, even though I didn't consider it real, but I was still coming from this kind of American mindset for I didn't feel I had to get married, but there's that marriage, if it happens, actually is meaningful. Whereas my ex was like, it's just a piece of paper in France. People don't get married. It's just so we can have a chance. And we eventually came to feel that that was the right way to go. And so we eloped out in Vegas. No Elvis. It was just, but it
We
was actually
eloped
pretty
in
cool.
California.
Holy shit. I had so this is the story of how we eloped. It's kind of funny because I had a business trip to go to Las Vegas for a professional convention because Vegas has tons of conventions. And they put me up at a really nice, like the Aria,
Mm.
a suite. And I could bring someone if I wanted. They just had to pay their own way. So we decided to go out there. We met on different flights. We met up, and then it was pretty cool. We got married in front of the "Welcome to Vegas" sign, and then we went to the Paris casino and did shots of Jameson and had a glass of champagne.
I
And then
love
we
it.
did one of the all-you-can-eat buffets. So classy as hell, but it was good. And we had an awesome connection, and she was and is an amazing person. But the relationship, as far as one that should have been solidified with a marriage, I have no regrets in the sense that there's pieces of my life I would never want to lose. but it's not the logical and review choice. So we ended up very quickly in the same situation, suddenly, intensely. She was dependent on me for a lot of stuff. I was the one who had more of obligations, responsibilities, and opportunities in my life in Chicago. So it made more sense for her to come. But then once there, as you probably experienced, it's hard for the French person to integrate. She avoided French people. That's one of the ironies.
Mm.
She was always annoyed by them. I'd be like, oh, we should go to Alliance Francaise event. We should go to the French American Chamber of Commerce. And I didn't know at the time French culture, but now I realize there's a lot of snooty ass, you know, French people. But then I remember it stood out. She's like, oh, I met this guy from Brittany too, and I usually don't like French people here, but he seems like someone to hang out with. So she met him on a New Year's, working at some New Year's event. Then I guess where should I stop? Because then what happened next was quite similar to yours. It's a situation of several years go on, and we had from the beginning a lot of these immediate same issues. There were a lot of things about us that were misaligned. Our worldview, our plans for the future, our way of living. We had these disconnects that would come and go physically because it's hard if you're having the problem of really connecting with each other to even see each other as that. And then every now and then we had some great projects to work on together that would bring us closer. But it was clear that there were a lot of times where she'd go back to France for a period of time or be traveling in the U.S. and we were apart. We weren't like in some open relationship, but there were a lot of times we were just really not together. And it was kind of challenging. But at some point, we decided she was really struggling with life in the U.S. and I felt that my career was going well in the U.S. in Chicago, but I was open to take a break and we decided I'd fill that by doing graduate school for the first year of the transition and then get a job in Europe, and we'd do that and maybe see what that meant for us because we had a lot of question marks about what would happen with us. But having that project was a big thing. We were so focused on that for all the time building up to it, and it gave us some kind of synergy together. But then quickly we moved, we went to Brittany, we stayed with her family, who fortunately had a little cottage that we could stay in, so we didn't have to be right on top of each other. But we had some nice experiences traveling around France, getting ready to move to Lyon, which is where I was going to do my MBA. And then we moved to Lyon and getting set up there. But right away, as soon as school started for me, things started to really fall apart quickly because she had a hard time integrating and reintegrating into France, difficulty in so many areas. And then I was in school and I had a structure for me and a group that welcomed me in. And I think it highlighted a lot of existing issues, but we quickly ended up to where we separated not long after the new year, and kind of not knowing what was going to be next. And I was focusing on school, and she was kind of figuring out some life still in Lyon. But by the time we got to my graduation, we were already pretty clear that we were going to go our separate ways. So yeah.
Like, so how it does sound very similar because I think like one of the things was it wasn't like a great heartbreak when it ended, right? Because everything was kind of like, let's see. And you kind of had to get married to see if it was going to be a real connection or not. And I think that's something that most Americans wouldn't be able to get their head around.
Mm-hmm.
It's like
Yeah, it's
to
very
jump
European.
yeah, like to jump into something that's really unknown, to see like, you know what, let's see how much love can develop, or like if it falls
Yeah.
apart we'll still be okay, right? So I think that's one of those things that you and I really never talked about, but it's very similar in the
Mm-hmm.
feel and the attitude, where it was just like, I care about you and it could be a great love. However, if it's not, then I'll be okay too. You know what I mean? And move on from there. So when we started, it was funny because like when we met up after your relationship had ended and my relationship had ended, and by then I had met my current partner
Oh
now.
yeah, that's right. I remember it because you had gone on this vacation down in,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and met a guy. You met him on the beach, right?
No, we just met in a piazza.
Okay.
And so, yeah, in Milan. And so he took me to, like, we went to the beach his beach
Okay, I
house
remember
like
there was a
later.
beach story and a beach house story. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So we went there later, but so when we were like having wine and like hanging out on the Seine,
Yeah.
like catching up,
Yep.
it
Living
was
our typical Parisian life.
so let's go
Yeah.
forward.
Back up.
So once the relationship ended, what was your catalyst for your next place? Because you went to Belgium, right?
Yeah. So basically, so the relationship ended while I was in graduate school, and we she kept the apartment that we'd had. We had a really cute place there, and I was easily able to rent a room at an apartment with students in Lyon, in a really beautiful area. It was a huge, typical French giant city apartment with a couple of different people staying there, but we shared, this place, and it was really nice. So I did that, and I kind of quickly switched to 100% student mode, and that was my response. And she, at the same time, I think had some things pick up for her, but there's a bit of pieces of our lives started to diverge, and there was a point where we were really, other than having to handle business, not in touch. We were giving each other space at that time. So for the rest of school in Lyon, I was living on my own, and then after graduation, I had to figure out where to go next because I still had time left on my visa. Although that's another story. We could talk about visa stuff because I
Yeah.
have a great story about France in that regard. But I decided that I was going to give myself until the end of the year to get a job in Europe because
Mm.
I wanted to stay in Europe. And I was focused on France because the uh, business school I went to in France is one of their elite ones, and just the name alone opens doors and stuff. Even though I think that stuff's bullshit, it worked.
Yeah.
But I felt that that was a strength to stay there in the French market. And at the time, my French was improving, but I was able to, in consulting, like, you can work in English. But anyways, I decided Paris would be the place to go because so many people who graduated from our program were already there. People I knew. I had a support network, which is part of the reason why Paris was good for me. But I was bouncing around during my time there. Occasionally I was like house sitting or renting a little spot for a little bit for like a month, or staying with a friend or a friend of a friend for a bit. And it was a very bohemian life, but it was pretty good life, and that's why I ended up there. And I worked at the incubator for my school. They had a Paris campus at Gare
Mm.
de Lyon, and so I would, during the day, I could work from the co-working space there on my job search, and I'd help out at the incubator with companies that were starting up, and then just living life until I found a job. And eventually, I got a job in Belgium, and that's why I moved to Brussels.
One of the things I think is important to note for people is once you kind of live this life, it's hard to go back to
Oh yeah,
what's considered normal, right?
yeah.
Like,
What's
I
considered
don't
normal
think
back in
that I
Chicago,
could go back
but is normal here.
exactly back in Chicago, back in the US. Like, when people talk to me about work and this, that, and the other, I'm like, if I worked again, I really needed to be like, I can't work in an office. I can't go back
Mhm.
to that corporate life. I can't do that again, right? So I think that this like little thing that kind of switches on or off in you and changes like changes you completely.
Mhm.
And I think also having those kind of relationships opens you up to something else mentally, emotionally, like, you know what I mean, spiritually, whatever. So when you are starting, because like that's one of the things, like people of our age, grown-ups over 30,
Yeah,
um when you start saying like I had roommates, I had this, I had that, I
yeah.
was living here and doing that, people are like, you sound like you're a mess. But
Back in
that's
the
so
U.S., yeah,
and back in the US, but that's
but
so
nowhere
normal. Yeah,
and here,
nowhere
yeah,
in Europe would
yeah,
someone be like, "Oh, that's a mess." Like, so
yeah, yeah,
back in the US, when people listen to this, they'll be like, "That sounds terrible. You're doing what now?" But that's so normal, and it's so
yeah,
like part of the lifestyle. And I think people don't, like you don't know it, you don't
yeah.
live it, and then you don't even think you can do it because like my first thing when we first left the US is I was house sitting in Guatemala, right? So when I tell people that, they're like, as a grown up, you know what I mean? And so it's
Yeah,
just a
yeah,
whole
yeah.
different life, and
And I
people
feel
don't
it's unfortunate
it
for
is.
them. And it's not that I'm arrogant in some way that all should aspire to live the way I do or see the world the way I do. But I think it's unfortunate that so many people cannot be open or accepting that there is another way that is not representative of a status in life. And unfortunately, one of the things, the big change is the U.S. culture is extremely oriented around consumption and conspicuous measures of like economic success. And to the point where even if that's not important to you, it's still how you measure and judge things. Like these are the stages you're at in life. If you have these things, it means you. And I think coming into a culture that's less consumer oriented, but also where it wasn't unusual to meet other people my age, expats reinventing themselves, and also locals who were just not like, you know, I see the same now with my relationship. I have an incredible relationship, and there's an age gap between my girlfriend and I, but it's never an issue for us and no issue here with her family. But anytime I mention it in the US, they'd be like, oh, wow, you're
What's the age gap?
18, 18 years. She's not 18. She's 20. She's 20.
I was about to say she's 18.
Yes, no. It's 18 years though. But she and we met through group mutual friends, a mixed generational group of friends. When I was living in Brussels, she's German and was visiting, and we have credible connection and equality in our relationship. However, the impression of that is much different if I mention it to one of the few Americans that I regularly would talk to versus it not being an issue here. Even though it is a big age gap, it's not something that we think is irrelevant, but it's not an issue for us, and it's not an issue in the world we live in, unless I'm back in the U.S.
Right. So let's go into a little bit relationships. So
Yeah, yeah.
from going from the French, I'm sure there's been some dating in between there. Now
Hmm.
you're with someone German. Like, how has your perspective on relationships adjusted, changed, different from, even the time you were in the US versus like going through the marriage, divorce, and like now where you are emotionally and you know what I mean in your relationships? Like, what's
Yeah.
different?
What are some of the things that changed from my life
Yeah,
in the
like
U.S.?
how
So
you
yeah,
look at relationships. And would you have been in a relationship that was like, if you were in the US with someone who was like 18 years your junior?
no, no, yeah. Not because of just the pure age, it's just different. That person at that age would be very different than
Hmm.
the European woman that I met, and the situations in which we were meeting. This wasn't not that there's anything wrong with the apps, but this is not a dating app match where it's like, traveling businessman getting together with a college student or something like that. Typical U.S. stuff. Actually, it's just people meeting in the normal summertime social scene of European cities and meeting mutual friends, a normal way, hitting it off, doing social activities together, and getting to know each other the way a lot of Europeans interact in groups. And then it just kind of happened naturally. And when she finally learned my age before something happened, she was surprised because, that black don't crack. She thought I was like older, but not much
Of
older.
course.
But it was never, and then the irony is, so then her best friend, who's a year younger than her, ended up in a relationship now with a Dutch guy who's a year younger than me, and
Mm.
so we joked that it was spreading. But I think it may not be more common necessarily in Europe, but I think it's more accepted. But the big changes for me were that I had fun single life in the U.S. I had good relationships in the U.S. I had some not so great ones. Nothing like overall traumatic. The first one was a mess, but that was because we were dumb kids. But nothing. But I would not say I was ever seeking something different. The reason I say that is I was never looking for international relationships because I wasn't satisfied with U.S. relationships. It was just that it happened, and I was
Mhm.
traveler and international oriented person. But I've had pretty good relationships. But the thing that I was always a bit awkward about it.
I
Especially the steps you have to go through, the dating and having talks and things. And so that was, yeah, maybe I stopped because you want to say something. And I was going to say
No,
how,
no, I'm listening. Like, I'm wondering why you feel like you were always awkward. Because, like, I mean, I met you, you never seemed, you know what I
no, so
mean?
I'm sociable. No, it's not. It's okay. So I'm
Okay.
sociable. I'm a bit, I hate to make it as simple as introvert, extrovert, but I'm more extroverted. But it's more that even if I was going through the motions fine, I just never liked the structure of American dating even before I knew of anything different. In the same way of like it's kind of like our work, it's every things are a little bit more categorized. in a way that, you know, how you meet people, having to be as a guy, it's still expected to like go and like pick people up or something, which I never have been done that. The social scene I enjoy for having fun. I never, and sometimes you can make a connection, but I felt in the U.S. it was never as easy as the social scene. I felt was less intense and competitive in Europe. So I didn't run away from American relationships, but I just, as I met, say, my ex, and I'd had some other international relationships just were that not as serious, but I started to find it a little easier. And then once I, just to be me, and then once I moved to Europe, and when I was single, I was a student, so I had my international cohort of friends, and then I also had this introduction to a lot of social life there, but I found it just easier. Um, for example, my ex used to complain that in Chicago, my French ex would go to a party or something without me. And this is when we were doing well because we had a very comfortable, kind of trusting relationship. And it wasn't like we had to do everything together. So she'd go to a party and be having a conversation with the guy, and he'd say, "Okay, so are we going back to my place now?" Or she's like, "What do you mean?" And this would happen all the time, where she was like, "We were having a good conversation," and she's like, "Well, you never said you had a boyfriend, and you're talking to me or something." It's like, "Why does that matter? Why do I have to tell you?" So something that she said, not that people don't try to pick each other up in the social scene in Europe, but I feel that is a key difference. I feel like many women that I talk to, you would have to say what your experience was like, can go out in public space and feel like I can socialize. Maybe it's flirtatious, maybe it's romantic, maybe it's just having a good conversation, but that could be an evening. Whereas in the U.S., it's like, okay, we've invested this time to get to from point A to point B. Does that make sense?
No, that makes sense. I think that's very true. I think that in the US, men definitely do not value having conversations.
Or goal oriented.
Yeah, like they don't value having conversations with women. It's like what's the end goal?
Mm-hmm.
I do think it's interesting because there is a difference between, I think, in France and in Italy. I mean, I haven't really dated,
And
like
it'll,
broadly. So when I was, in France and I was out with like my friends that was there, I mean, if you smile at someone, it's considered flirting in
yeah,
in Europe, right?
yeah,
Whereas in America, we smile all the time. We smile,
yeah, yeah.
hello, So I kind of had to learn not to smile at people
Hmm.
because that was an invitation. So like that was usually when I would get approached. Not if I was just having a chat with someone.
Yeah,
It would be like if I were walking down the street and someone like made eye contact and you smile because
yeah, yeah,
you're
yeah.
American, and then they're like, excuse moi. And they're like, oh
Yeah,
wait,
yeah,
no.
yeah.
I forgot I wasn't supposed to smile. So like those kind of things. And I think now I'm much better at not randomly smiling at strangers.
Having a European face, right? Like,
Yes, having a very
yeah,
European
not smiling
face.
all.
So I and actually when we went to me and my partner now, when we went to the US and he was like, everyone's so friendly. They're smiling at people and saying hello. And, he was like, wow, so it was
Yeah, it's very overwhelming
like,
for them to see that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
This is
So,
coming from a Southern European culture that is more animated than, say, Germany or Belgium by
right,
comparison.
right.
Yeah,
No, that's very true.
but
And
it's
so
funny. Yeah.
it's very funny to see like that cultural thing. But I do think, you know, French, the French are more subtle
Hmm.
in how they would approach a situation, even if you were having a chat with someone and they wanted to um, pick you up or whatever. For example, I remember at a party, this guy I was chatting with him and he's like, I work at this place, you should come and visit. And I was just like, oh, that would be cool. Like, I'm not even thinking like he was like
Yeah, yeah,
flirting.
yeah.
And so when I told my now ex at the time, I was like, "Oh yeah, your friend invited me to come to his work. He says he works at this place and he'll give me a tour." And he was like, "Are you kidding me?" And I was like, "What's wrong with that?" And he was like, "No, no, 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 that's not appropriate." And I was just kind of like, "Okay, so
I don't
it's
know, but yeah, but
I know, I was
but
just kind of like, it's not." And so I don't know, it was one of those things where he was super jealous anyway, and I think that like just had something to do with his insecurities.
Mm.
But I do think you're right about like the overall dating is different, and it's not, I guess, as stressful in some ways. You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
never felt stressed with it. The other thing, and this is a gender um, aspect that may differ in our perspectives, but as a man, as a straight man, I felt that one of the big differences for me was that I felt, regardless of politics, personal beliefs, individual, religious beliefs, some individuals' personality, American women have a lot, I think, of judgment, expectations, and um, thoughts around sexuality and relationships that are quite that set a lot of expectations or put a lot of attention on being unavailable or being um, a certain way or defensive around men. This is just something I notice in difference in behavior. So it may not be that way from in the intention, but it's the way it appears. Versus in
Do you mean
Europe,
like
where I felt
playing the game of like, waiting to respond, or like what do you mean like
so what
intent?
I would mean is to give the other side of it, and this is again maybe it's inaccurate perspective, but the difference I noticed because when I became aware of that was in Europe, and the difference I noticed is that, and I don't just mean with sex, but just with interaction romantically, I felt that in France and Belgium, the places where I had my experience, the women were less worried about some expectation of
Like
being
if
judged
you have
or that they
sex,
had to
then
behave
you
the
have
way.
to be in a relationship. There has to
Yes,
be an
or
expectation.
interacting with a guy, I felt like interacting with it, despite the story you said, just like we could interact, and the idea was, if something happens with me showing my interest, they're perfectly capable to say, no, I'm with somebody else, or I like you, or because of our shared interest, I'm not interested in that. We can continue just being friends or something like that. Whereas there is just this autonomy expected as a woman that you would make a decision for yourself.
I
That
understand what
if you have a relationship, and I'm generalizing, of course, here, but if you
yeah.
have a relationship, you protect your relationship. It doesn't mean you don't have friends of the opposite sex or that you don't socialize. And likewise, when it came to getting involved, that people were making decisions because they felt like that was the right
So
thing to do for them, not to get you to go further in the relationship or something.
I think that I completely understand. One of the things I think with sex is that there's a lot less judgment of like when you have sex,
Yeah,
how,
yeah.
you know what I mean, with someone, or, but I also think that European men are different in the respect that they respect boundaries more.
Mm.
So I think that a lot of times in the US, women feel
Mm.
very
Because they have men
defensive
who are not going to respect
their
them,
boundaries,
or
and
maybe
they're not
physically even won't respect them.
physically like there's so much, and like oh my god, we should have a whole chat just on this,
Hmm.
because I one of the things that I'm
Lots
always
of
trying,
chats. I love it.
yeah, like lots of stuff we can talk about, like there is a lot of boundary issues, whereas in Europe, even when a man is trying to be aggressive, if you're like, dude, I said no,
Yeah,
he will apologize and walk away. You know what I mean? Whereas in the US, it's more likely that man is going to attack you in some way,
yeah.
be
I
it
feel like there's this
verbally,
entitlement
physically,
that
like,
I'm
yeah.
this type of guy with this status in our society. Do you know where I went to school? It doesn't have to just be these guys, but I would see these people and I just did this for you. You owe me. It's an exchange. It's almost like that
Right.
commodification of everything.
Exactly.
But maybe that's my rant. But yeah. Um, so the one other thing I was going to say about the change that you asked about is a really good question. But the biggest change for me is, in general, everything for me was better as a single person in Europe versus the US. It's not because I didn't have great experiences in the US, and there are some that are just, I know, are typically American and that I love, including all of my awkward teen years and other stuff. I'm glad I grew up with that, but I feel that everything's just a bit more adult and fun for me in Europe, both adult in the sense that people just I awkwardly tried to explain that I just felt that women have, in general, had more autonomy. Not because this is everything some perfect gender paradise, but as a guy, I experience, and there's not as much representation in business, for example, but that's what
Right.
I would boil it down to on that is for me. Um, I found that I was comfortable and thriving in the social life, romantic, social life, dating, whatever world in which women in general were at a more equal position
Equal.
and had grown up that way, so that there were just things that even if I couldn't articulate them, were missing from them. It's like when you are, I have to behave this way, and I'm going to be judged, and I have to show, but when I do this, then I can be bad, but only in that situation. And these things are, and that's, I think, a lot of American sex is compartmentalized like that. And then you come to a place where I don't know how many European acquaintances were like, oh yeah, in high school it was normal for friends and I to have their girlfriend or boyfriend spend the night at home, and
Oh
that's
no,
like,
it's true. I'm still like getting over like the summer holidays, like when the teenagers' cousins have their girlfriends or boyfriends staying the entire summer with them away from their parents in the summer house with their boyfriends. I'm still like kind of like
yeah,
so not used to that. So I think maybe there's a whole nother dynamic that in those situations that we're not even aware of how the parents are involved in those relationships. I don't know. It's just a theory because I feel like just the fact that I know how involved our my partner's parents are in our relationship, and not like in our relationship but in our lives.
mhm.
um and what value add they have. I mean, his mom counsels both of us when we're having problems, you know what I mean, or we're upset. She talks to both of us, and I very much feel like she treats me just like she would her child. You know what I mean? So maybe that dynamic also plays a part in that, the teenagers
that's
all being there.
that's an interesting possibility. While I don't have any experience for myself with many of the youth relationships, I guess I do meet people who maybe have had long-term relationships, maybe even they're still together now. But I was also thinking back to Chicago, where I'd meet these people. You get a lot of people from the more rural or small town or really conservative parts of the Midwest, and they'd be like, "This is my girlfriend. We've been together since the eighth grade," and they're like 25 or something. So I was thinking of that, but that's probably a bit different. I did
A
read
little,
something,
like, possibly.
yeah,
I don't.
but I did read something once that was, it was one of these relationship surveys comparing countries, and the exact numbers I don't remember, but basically, um, Europeans, and they were talking about Western Europeans on average had fewer relationships than Americans on average, where
Yeah.
Americans would have a lot more. And I feel like I see that. I feel like Americans are more mobile and stuff in general. Europeans, a lot of them, they've been in the same place their whole life, and they travel
Yeah.
and they do Erasmus and stuff, but they know people around them, and I think that's still more important. Whereas in American culture, and I'm not comparing in a way to say better or worse, I'm just laying it out there what I see. In American culture, you're kind of an independent unit to an extreme. And yes,
No.
here's your family, but for most Americans, I got to blaze it on my own. Maybe I'm going to move across the country. Maybe I'm going to go to school here. Maybe I'm going to switch jobs and go there. And you're always reinventing. So maybe that's part of it. There's
No,
more
it's probably true.
flexibility, whereas people know, like, I don't know. Yeah. So I think that's a little bit of it. But
I think that's very true. Well, I think we've had a good chat.
yeah,
What
yeah.
do you
We
think?
opened the door to a lot of future chats we have. We have to
We
have a
did.
brainstorming session
We
and
are. We
map
are.
this out.
We gotta talk way more often
Yeah.
because I feel like we try to connect and then
Yeah.
like the kids and life and you're
Yeah.
working and your relationship and I'm just like,
Uh,
and by the time like everything comes to pass, I'm like, let's was like the other day when I saw you online, I was like, hey, let's chat.
yeah. Yeah. And I'm so grateful for that.
Like I didn't realize how similar our
Yeah. When
experience
you
was.
first started talking, and I was like, holy shit, you said in words that you helped me. I've now stolen words from you that articulate what I experienced. And now I have some words that I can use if I'm ever having that talk about, oh, what happened to your relationship? Well, this, and this. You said it well. And it was like, holy shit, pretty much the same. Yeah. In a
Yeah,
lot of ways.
it was. So I want to
Yeah.
thank everybody for watching our little chat, and I think it was very interesting. And
Yeah.
we're gonna have more chats, so get used to Aaron's pretty little face.
Oh, gosh.
Um,
Oh, I
if you
have the
haven't already,
filter on. I have the filter
no,
that
you
makes it
don't.
beautiful.
It's trust me, guys. He's very handsome, but he is taken.
Yep.
Um, so subscribe to the channel, and I want to thank you guys for watching. And ciao, ciao for now.